Hello, welcome to The View from Felaban. I'm now talking to Stein, who is the global head of climate finance within the financial institutions group of the IFC, the World Bank's private sector arm. Thank you for joining me, Pia. I want to ask you about green finance. Obviously, that's a big part of what you do. It has become a bit of a buzzword, but there are still lots of cynics who really think it's just a bit of a branding exercise. What would you say to them?
So green finance for banks is at least as transformational, if not more, as fintech and digital is for banking. Green finance poses a threat on the risks for the bank lending, and the Financial Stability Board has been working on this for a while to identify this more. But much more importantly, it also is the single largest business opportunity for banks over the next decade.
Why is it the single largest? Can we quantify it? And how big is your involvement in green finance, for example? So starting from the IFC.
Sure. So, well, let me first talk about the market. So we've done an analysis of the investment opportunity for climate business in emerging markets. And we estimate that about 23 trillion US dollars will be invested in climate-related businesses until 2030, into renewables, in green businesses, in energy efficiency, in waste recycling. So a huge opportunity for banks in emerging markets, of which about $2.6 trillion are in Latin America alone. IFC has been investing in climate finance over the last decade, and since 2005 we've invested $15 billion in climate finance and mobilized another $10 billion. But we recognize the opportunity that it presents. So going forward until 2030, we expect to invest $70 billion into climate and mobilize another $130 billion.
So from a political point of view, and so also in a way from an investor's point of view, there is a great awareness and interest in these products, green bonds, even social and environmental impact bonds, and other kind of products. But how do you actually differentiate, for example, a green bond from a non-green bond, in terms of pricing, in terms of how do you monitor where proceeds go, in terms of taxonomy and regulation around that?
Yeah, green bonds have certainly been one of the fastest growing segments in capital markets. There's been a little bit of a hype. I think in terms of total issuances, it will probably be flat this year, but we still see significant interest from investors into this asset class. And I think that trend will just continue. How do you differentiate green bonds from non-green bonds? That's at the core of every green bond issuance, right? You have to define the use of proceeds and apply a taxonomy or definition to this issuance. And there's a number of taxonomies out there. IFC has developed its own definitions, which we have been working with for the last decade with our clients. So IFC's metrics and climate definitions, which are largely aligned with the broader definitions that the development finance institutions have. And if you compare some of the taxonomies that are currently being developed in Europe, or some of the regulators that have already developed taxonomies in some countries like China, about 90-95% of the taxonomies are the same. But the key, of course, is to be precise about defining what you mean by green and to be able to report on the impact that relates to your climate financing.
And
IFC has provided tools to its banks so that we can actually help with the impact reporting as well.
that was going to be my question: how precise is this reporting? And I would imagine that this is one of the key issues from an investor's point of view. We were having a little chat earlier before recording the interview, and you mentioned a really interesting case of a Chinese bank that is focused on green finance, and was keen to ask you a little bit more if you can explain and give me a few details about the specific case.
We see green finance as an opportunity to gain market share, right? And I think the early movers in the space will certainly be rewarded, because they will be able to articulate the value proposition to their clients but also to new clients that other banks currently are serving. And we have one case where we started working with Industrial Bank of China about 10 years ago, when it was still a relatively small bank, small by Chinese standards. It was number 77 in the list of Chinese banks. And it has chosen to embrace sustainable finance as a core strategic pillar for its development at the board level, and then it trickled down to the management and all the way through the bank. They've set up sustainable finance centers all across China, and it really helped them to gain market share in China. Today, they're the 10th largest bank in China, and a good proof that this strategy really works.
And perhaps not many would know that part of the growth strategy was, as you say, green finance. Perhaps it would be interesting to see how the space developed in Latin America. So we are obviously here at Felaban, and you just come out of a panel discussion where you also discussed the Green Academy that the IFC has put together. So I'm keen to ask you a few questions about that, how it works in practice, and whether Latin American banks are actually interested in developing their strategy in this area.
Yeah, so the Latin American banks are definitely interested. We actually did a survey last year of Latin American banks jointly with Felaban, and we found that 46% of all banks have already made strategic commitments towards climate finance. About half of the banks offer climate-related lending. 64% have environmental risk management systems in place, and about 3/4 also focus on their own internal resource efficiency of their operations. And those banks that do not yet offer climate-related lending are interested in the space. In fact, 9 out of 10 banks want to enter the space as they don't yet have operations there. So one of the key areas that we found in the survey, though, was that knowledge and capacity building holds banks back to enter the space. And this is why we conceived jointly with Felaban and our partners, i.e. Business School from Spain, as well as RENAC from Germany, the IFC Green Banking Academy, which will provide tailor-made knowledge to all parts of a bank that wants to enter green finance.
Very well, so something to monitor, and I'm sure we'll keep on talking for much longer in the future about green finance and the role that banking can play in the whole climate space. Thank you very much for your comments, Pierre.
Thank you, Silvia.